Welcome everyone to our first in a series of charity chats. I'm joined today by Charles Mesquita from Quilter Cheviot and James Saunders from Kingston Smith. We are talking or going to talk about a range of topics in these sessions, but to start things off today, Charles, James and I were at an event yesterday, and one of the comments that was thrown out there was that there are too many registered charities, and also the query of, and should all of those entities even be charities? And I just wondered for both of you whether you agree with that or what your thoughts might be.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting. I mean, partly the comment was aimed at small organisations with turnovers of less than, let's say, £10,000, and whether they needed to be a registered charity. And I think that's slightly a separate sort of conversation, and we might come on to that. But, you know, 20 years ago, when I sort of first came into the charity sector, I certainly was down the route of there are too many charities, too many people doing too much of the same. This is really inefficient and everything else. And I have to say, I've had a complete change. It's a bit like St. Paul's on the road to Damascus, because fundamentally, I think that actually, if you want a healthy charitable sector and the richness that that brings to our society, you have to allow free market forces to do it. I think that if we started turning around to people and saying, well, actually, you've got to go and identify the 10 charities all doing the same thing to you, and actually you've got to work out how you're all going to become one. And then you suddenly will put a whole load of regulations in and restrictions and everything else. And I think you will lose that people's passion for doing things, the innovation, and also, you know, which is equally important, is the number of people who volunteer both as trustees and helping out charities month in, month out, and the value that they give back to society and what they get back from it. So I'm very much so not an advocate of that we should restrict the number of charities, and that 166,000 is too many. I possibly think that we should challenge ourselves as trustees to say, actually, could we be more efficient? Could we be more effective by looking at collaboration with other organisations?
I agree, and I think that was the consensus generally at the event that we were at yesterday. Was not that there are too many charities. What there is the group is a hugely diverse group. So you've got at the top end, or at one end, you've got multi-million-pound, multinational, cross-border, international, non-governmental organisations. I mean, that is a charity. There is also a charity which is the village hall or the PTA at the other end of the scale, and the difficulty is regulating both of those. Is a massive difference in what the regulations, not just the Charity Commission, but in my world, the accounting regulations, talking about public interest entities now, trying to monitor, assess, regulate, a pie in the accountancy world with the smaller charity down the road. I mean, it's a hugely different proposition for anyone trying to do that. And then on our side, trying to advise on it, or, with another hat on, trying to run a charity or help out with a charity as a trustee or a governor or anything like that. So it's the diversity of the group, the diversity of the sector, and that's changing as well with the amount of new funders and new activists that are coming in. Not what they want to do charitable stuff, but they don't want to be a charity. So you've got these KICs and CIOs and other social enterprises. All of that is changing, and I just wonder whether we're really we're not looking at one sector anymore. We're looking at a sector with a number of very diverse and very specific subsectors in there, all of which need to be looked at separately.
It's an interesting point. I think that wider piece, isn't it, about non-profit as a whole? And I often find when people talk to me about there's too many registered charities, it's always existing charities that say that. So they don't want new charities to be let in. And I think it's interesting the point that Charles makes, that I think that's a shared responsibility of all trustees of currently registered charities to question, are we as effective as we can be? Should we continue as we are? Should we be operating in a different way? Which leads on to all sorts of different discussions, I think, rather than just focusing on this registration access point.
Yeah, and I also think, Bar Research UK, where I'm a trustee, and we're spending, I don't know, 700 to £1 million a year on research, or we're sort of funding it over a 3-year period. If you look at Cancer Research UK and how much they spend, well, when it comes to bowel cancer, I know we're not just bowel cancer, they're spending less than 5%, I think, last time I looked at their report and accounts on that particular area, despite it being the 3rd or 4th biggest killer in the UK. But actually what they're spending is considerably more than what we're able to spend, because their turnover is that much. But is that wrong? Should we just fold ourselves into the fact, actually, our brief is wider than just cancer, the fact that we've got, an eminent board of trustees drawing from some really bright and people are leading in their field around bowel research and bowel disease. You think, well, actually, this is just adding to it rather than taking it away or making it less efficient. I thought one of the interesting comments that came out of one of the people there was around shared services. And I know we don't want to get into the subject of VAT, but it does seem to me absolutely nuts that if you decide from a basis that as a group of charities you get together and you have a certain amount of the administration that is done collectively, that adds to the cost, not reducing it, which is why you'd sort of logically think that that's what you're doing if you're trying to be more efficient. So I think that would be a really simple thing that government could actually do, which wouldn't be terribly complex, that would help the sector.
Yeah, and I think on that theme of helping the sector, I do wonder about the Charity Commission's role as the regulator and whether they are there as the ultimate ambassador for the charity sector, or whether they're seen as becoming involved when there is an issue with charities, so always when they're on the back foot, rather than supporting and encouraging the thousands of volunteers who act as charity trustees.
Well, there was an interesting
doubt that it's been the as you described it, dealing with charities, not necessarily helping them at all for some time. But Charles, I mean, you were saying that you heard the new chair's inaugural speech, and it was a much more positive, you felt, than what it has been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's encouraging. We've now got a chair of the Charity Commission who's actually been a trustee, and certainly one of the main parts. So I think he was day 3 in the job, and we were meant to have the chief executive speaking, and he'd stepped in and said no, he would, and wrote the speech himself, I believe. But he did make a very big case of the value that we should put on volunteers, and that we shouldn't be doing looking for a blame game when things go wrong, and one hopes that would come to fruition. It was interesting though yesterday, wasn't it, because there was also this whole debate around what the responsibility of the regulator is of promoting trust and confidence in the charity sector, and what does that mean? And if you look at it in plain English, it means that actually going out there and reminding people about how important and what an amazing job charities generally do, and how they enrich our lives as a result of it.
And I think that's something we've talked about on previous sessions, actually, was in the pandemic. I think many people did start to realise actually some of the core services that they rely on are delivered by charities, not by the state. And I think the Charity Commission, they do fantastic work in terms of their guidance, and then also trying to disseminate that into the 5-minute guides to make that more accessible. But it'll be interesting to see, I think, how their role develops and whether they are standing alongside charities or possibly standing in front of them rather than behind them, waiting for things to go wrong and for things to fall.
There's also, I mean, there is a wider question about the representation of the charity sector as a whole. How does the sector represent itself? There are a number of separate representation groups who I think have got better at working together during the pandemic. Clearly, it brought an awful lot of different groups together. The representative bodies, I think, for our sector are starting to work better together. Again, it might well be that they find themselves overlapping quite a lot in the future if they're doing more together. But that collaboration reflects, I think, as well, the whole charity sector, which individual charities have found themselves working together much, much more effectively through the pandemic, and that's been replicated by the representative bodies, I think. The key is to then start to talk with that unified, united voice to government in particular. I mean, it's been noticeable that recent budgets, there's never anything mentioned about the sector specifically. It's very much part of the wider economy, the wider organisation of the country as a whole. There's very little ever said specifically about the charity sector. Perhaps we as a sector need to speak with a more cohesive and just a louder voice to represent ourselves.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because every time I'm sort of standing up on a platform and speaking to trustees, the first thing I ever do is remind them about the size of the sector. And the numbers are very simple. I mean, the turnover of charities is something like 78 billion a year. That's twice what we spend on defence and half what we spend on the NHS. So,
and the diversity of the services, Charles, as well is. I mean, it's such a broad church. So, I mean, that is a key challenge, definitely.
So that goes back to your point about in the budget, how often do they talk about defence and the NHS, or the NHS in particular? And you think the charity sector gets forgotten. I mean, the statistics are amazing. I mean, there's something like somewhere between 900,000 and 1 million trustees. You've got something like 16 million people volunteer each year. I mean, the numbers are extraordinary, and it does sometimes feel a little bit like the forgotten sector.
It does. And I hope that these charity chats will give us that opportunity, I think, to pull out some of these themes. And I think what we'll see, whether it's directly the next one or a future one, will be that evolving role of the Charity Commission with their new chair, and the different issues that are coming up and facing charities at the moment. But we hope you've enjoyed this first Charity Chats, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.